as you can see by the title of my lesson this morning. It's Samson, the weak, strong man. And when I think about Samson, the word potential comes to mind, and that's a strong word with a lot of meaning in the life of a young person. And when I used to teach high school, I taught the same kids for 3 or 4 years, and I'd see them grow up together, and we would do a lot of competitions and different things together. And sometimes I would see kids that had a lot of potential that never really got utilized, or I wasn't sure if they used it the way that necessarily I thought they should, or maybe the way I wanted them to. But Samson is a character that has a lot of potential and had a lot of potential, and very, very much was given to him. And he's a very interesting character as we delve into it, and it was a little bit of a conundrum to me as I studied Samson. I was a little bit confused at times, and as I read him, and some of these things I may just leave to you to see what you think about them. But he's a man whose life is committed to God, but he grows up and spends a lot of his time chasing women and seeking revenge and just kind of reacting to the things around him. And that's why I like to think of him as calling him the weak, strong man. And in some ways, he's even a type of Christ, blessed by God to be the deliverer of his people, born of a miraculous birth, spending time with Philistines and with harlots as Christ spent time with publicans and Gentiles and sinners. And he even died a tragic death before a bunch of his enemies in order to attempt and help to save his people and bring his people out of slavery as they were in at the time, or being oppressed. But Samson, he gets caught up in kind of a vicious cycle that ultimately costs him everything, costs him his life. And he's a man of legendary feats, but he's also, and certainly a man, I think, of legendary flaws. And I think when we take a moment, we look at his life, most of us wouldn't necessarily want to imitate his life or make a lot of the same choices he did, but at the same time, we see some of ourselves in Samson. I think that we can learn some things about him as we delve into it. He was listed in the hall of faith, as we call it, and Hebrews 11:32 says, "And what shall I more say, for the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and of Barak and of Samson and of Jephthah and David also and Samuel and of the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, waxed valiant in fight, turned to flight the armies of the aliens." So we look at Samson, and is he a sinner or a saint? He doesn't really neatly fit into maybe our idea of the religious categories and religious heroes. So we think about it. Why did God choose him? Strong as an ox, but weak as paper. He's the 13th judge over Israel, and he's not always necessarily, as I said, the best example to look to for some of the decisions he makes. But as we study Samson, I think we can learn quite a bit from him and see some interesting things. And the story of Samson, the historical accounting, what takes place in Judges 13 through 16, and the setting is around 12th century BC in the land of Israel. And this is the time when the Philistines were being oppressed by the children of Israel. And the Israelites had sinned, and God allowed the Philistines in as punishment. 13 verse 1, it says, "And the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. And we can take a moment, we look at that phrase, "and the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord," and we see that all throughout Judges. That exact phrase pretty much appears in those different verses, and generally that meant they were turning away from God, and they were worshiping Baal or one of the other many false gods around there at the time. But as I said, the Philistines had been holding the land for 43 years before Samson was born, and they continued as a threat through the lives of Samuel and Saul and David. But Samson was going to begin to be the release of the people. And kind of interesting, just a side note, one of the ways that they were able to hold the Israelites for so long is they controlled the iron. So it's very difficult for the Israelites to have any type of weapons, any spears or swords or anything like that. They had to go to the Philistines for anything like that. So just an interesting side note found in my studies. But going to the life of Samson, kind of starting at the beginning, we're going to kind of go through a story and pull some things out. Early on, an angel appeared to Manoah's wife, and that is Samson's mother. We never actually, I don't believe, see her name in anywhere. She's just referred to as Manoah's wife. And she was barren, and we know for God that's no big deal. In fact, that's something that he works with quite often. He takes a barren woman and is born a child who ends up being a faith hero or someone who's a very big biblical character that we will study often. And these were faithful people in a difficult time, so we see that God blessed them. And the angel appeared to tell her that she was going to have a son. 13 verse 3, it says, "And the angel of the Lord appeared unto the woman and said unto her, Behold now, thou art barren, and bearest not. But thou shalt conceive and bear a son. Now therefore beware, I pray thee, and drink not wine nor strong drink, and eat not any unclean thing. For lo, thou shalt conceive and bear a son, and no razor shall come on his head. For the child shall be a Nazarite unto God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hands of the Philistines." So this son that she was going to have was going to be sanctified of the Lord, and he was going to live as a Nazarite his entire life from conception to death, and that really means to be set apart. And if you think about that, we can see parallels there, because the church, essentially, we are the set apart as well. And if you remember Samuel, he was born of Hannah, and she was barren as well, and he was also promised to God as a Nazarite. And Samson received great strength, and Samuel went on to become a great prophet. And we look at that idea of being a Nazarite, and there's three main points that are emphasized from that vow, and that is they must not drink anything from grape products or strong alcohol, or even be around like the skins, the husks, the seeds, raisins, things like that. They must not go anywhere near dead bodies or even a family member, if I understand, that perishes. They're not supposed to touch those things or be close to those bodies, and they're not supposed to cut their hair. So that's a vow for them to be set apart, and that vow kind of reminds me of one that Paul talks about in Romans 12, verse 1. It says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present yourselves, your bodies, a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. So we see a similar vow that we make as Christians, that we're supposed to be set apart from the world, not conformed to this world, transformed and dedicating our lives to God as well. And we see a lot of parallels as we make this study. But Samson, when he grows up, as I said, he's going to be the beginning of the deliverance of Israel, and the children of Israel, all the mistakes they make, and as unworthy as they seemed here, well, what happened? God still sent them a Savior. Another parallel we can see, just like us, definitely a people never worthy of Christ and his sacrifice, but God sent us that Savior anyway. And as Samson grew, God blessed him, and the Spirit stirred within him. And verse 24 says, and the woman bare a son and called his name Samson. And the child grew, and the Lord blessed him. And the Spirit of the Lord began to move him at times in the camp of Dan between Zorah and Eshtaol. So Samson is going to be given much, and I'd say given much in a sense, even compared to some of the other Bible heroes that we look at, we study. So like I said earlier, he had a lot to work with. He had a lot of potential. And we see him grow up, and he's going to get into some things that he probably shouldn't have, make some interesting decisions. And we see early on, he's moved by God, and Samson finds a woman of the Philistines to marry. And this is something unusual for him. They weren't supposed to be intermingling with the pagans and people of the Philistines. We see Samson did in Judges 14, verse 1. It says, and Samson went down to Timnath and saw a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. And he came up and told his father and his mother and said, I have seen a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me to wife. Then his father and his mother said unto him, is there never a woman among the daughters of thy brethren, or among all thy people, that thou goest to take a wife of the uncircumcised Philistines? And Samson said to his father, get her for me, for she pleaseth me well. But his father and his mother knew not that it was of the Lord, that he sought an occasion against the Philistines. For at that time, the Philistines had dominion over Israel. And this is something I want us to remember through as we study this, and this is what's kind of interesting to me about Samson, all the choices he makes that we look at, we scratch our heads, say, why did he do that as a man of God? But verse 4, it says, remember, but his father and his mother knew not that it was of the Lord, that he sought occasion against the Philistines. So we're going to see how God is using Samson throughout this story. But we look at this man, we think, why would God want Samson to marry a non-Israelite, somebody they're not supposed to be associated with? And it's interesting also when we study here, it's really one of the only places in the book of Judges where we don't read about the people crying out to God to be delivered from their oppression. And the game plan of the Philistines really, as far as I can tell, was kind of just to dominate by intermingling, by getting involved with the people, by intermarrying, and slowly absorbing their religion and their culture, and as it disappeared into the culture around them. And that's scary to me, and it sounds a little bit familiar to me, because we see the church sometimes in danger of losing its impact on the world because we slowly kind of become assimilated to the culture around us and the things of the world. And that's something that we have to make sure we don't let happen, that we don't let our voice get silenced, to get lost in the culture and the world around us. So why was he going to marry this woman? Well, God can use anything to work his will, and he can use anything that's out before him. We know that he does, and he's used wickedness and interesting ideas before to achieve his goals. And even in Hosea 1 and 2, the beginning of the word of the Lord by Hosea, and the Lord said to Hosea, go take unto thee a wife of whoredoms and children of whoredoms, for the land hath committed great whoredom, departing from the Lord. So essentially, I think he's saying that the children of Israel are being unfaithful, so you might as well take an unfaithful wife. It's almost like a reflection of the things that are going on around him in the world. And we know also that God is looking to cause problems for the Philistines, so he's kind of getting Samson intermingled in that situation and putting him in there. But Samson's parents, of course, they don't understand what's happening, and they try to talk their son out of marrying this woman, because I said she is not an Israelite, and they were expressly forbidden to marry pagans. And Samson's reason, if you look at it, it's not a good one. It's a poor reason. He basically wants her because he thinks that she looks good, and he even said, that she's pleasing unto me. And that is an example of Samson. He's strong on the outside and weak on the inside. And he's putting his desires ahead of common sense, ahead of what is right, ahead of God's will. We need to make sure we don't do that, because I know sometimes we fall into those traps. And he seems like needed consequences to put him down the right path. And sometimes we're the same way. We need consequences almost to make us wake up and see that we're headed down the wrong pathway. But in the situation with his parents and this woman, Samson prevails, and his parents, and they're going to go to meet her, and they travel down to see her, and Samson encounters this lion. In 14 verse 5, it says, "Then went Samson down, and his father and his mother to Timnath, and came to the vineyards of Timnath, and behold, a young lion roared against him. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he rent him as he would have rent a kid, and he had nothing in his hand. But he told not his father or his mother what he had done." So I guess this is the first instance, and the first time we see Samson's great strength given to him by the power of God. And one of the things looking at this that I find interesting, if you notice, it says that they came to the vineyards of Timnath. Well, what's a vineyard? That's grapes, and that's wine, and that's something that we know he was not supposed to be close to. So in a sense, to me, he's tempting fate. And what happens when we tempt fate? When we go somewhere we're probably not supposed to be, or we go somewhere with potential for bad, a lot of times bad things happen, and we get in a situation that we don't need to be in. And here he encounters this lion. And it says he kills the lion with his bare hands. He doesn't just get it in a chokehold. I mean, not to be graphic, but he rips this thing apart. So we see early on this incredible strength that he has in this situation. Kind of interesting, too, you think about the idea, well, this is all of a sudden a dead body he's encountering. But I think that wouldn't count in his vow because it is an animal and they don't have souls in my studies. But I'm not sure, but I think that's kind of interesting, something to think about as we move forward with this. So later on the way to the marriage, they pass by the same area, and Samson encounters the carcass of the lion that he killed. In verse 7 it says, "And he went down and talked with the woman, and she pleased Samson well. And after a time he returned to take her. He turned aside to see the carcass of the lion. And behold, there was a swarm of bees and honey in the carcass of the lion. And he took thereof in his hands, and went on eating, and came to his father and mother, and he gave them, and they did eat. But he told them not that he had taken the honey out of the carcass of the lion." So strangely, I have the situation where the honeybees have formed a hive in the mouth of the lion, and there's honey there, and Samson takes some and he eats it, and he also gives it to his family. And again, why doesn't he tell them? Is it because of the corpse? Is it because maybe he doesn't want his family to know about his great strength yet? That they don't really understand the situation that he is in. But it's kind of interesting to think about. So they're going to go forth with the marriage, and they're going to hold a gigantic feast as custom with the wedding ceremony. And the Hebrew word there means essentially a drinking bash. So again, that's something that Samson probably wasn't supposed to be involved in, tempting fate, because we know he's supposed to keep from strong drink. And this feast lasted 7 days. And at the feast, Samson was given 30 attendants, kind of part of the bridal party, men to be there. And if you stop and think about it, I kind of think they might have almost been bodyguards, because I doubt the Philistines really trusted Samson and probably wanted to keep an eye on him and put some people there that they thought that, that they knew. But as part of the entertainment, or maybe even a way for Samson to get rid of these men that were with him or kind of occupy them, he presented them with a riddle. Beginning in verse 12, 14, it says, "And Samson said unto them, I will now put forth a riddle unto you. If you can certainly declare it me within the 7 days of the feast and find it out, then I will give you 30 sheets and 30 change of garments. But if you cannot declare it me, then you shall give me 30 sheets and 30 change of garments. And they said unto him, Put forth thy riddle that we may hear it. And he said unto them, Out of the eater came forth meat, and out of the strong came forth sweetness. And they could not in 3 days expound the riddle." So these young men are working on this riddle that's been presented to them for 3 days, and they can't figure it out. So what do? They turn to Samson's wife. And they threaten Samson's wife that they were going to burn down her house with her and her father inside if she doesn't get the answer for them. So apparently these are some great guys that they've given to watch over him, because this is riddle, and this is the way that they handled the situation. He says, "And it came to pass on the 7th day that they say unto Samson's wife, Entice thy husband, that he may declare unto us the riddle, lest we burn thee and thy father's house with fire. Have you called us to take that we have? Is it not so?" And of course she, instead of telling Samson of the threat, what does she do? She begs for the answer, and she kind of whines for the answer. She harasses him for the answer every day, and it's a difficult situation for her, but she does that. And finally, on the 7th day of the wedding, he gives in to her, and she in turn tells the attendants the answer to the riddle. And Samson, he knows how they solve the problem, and he's angry, and he feels humiliated, and he acts in vengeance. And Samson's supposed to get that 30 garments, remember? Well, he does it by killing 30 Philistines that he can use their stuff to pay off the debt. Judges 14, verse 19, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon and slew 30 men of them, and took their spoil, and gave change of garments unto them which expounded the riddle. And his anger was kindled, and he went up to his father's house. So he goes, he reacts, he gets angry. He kills these men, and then he storms off to his father's house in anger without his wife. But later, I guess maybe he calms down, maybe he doesn't, I don't know. He decides to go back, and he brings her a present. And he brings her a young goat. And this is something I just studied. I don't know if he meant this to mock her or not, but there are some other examples of a young goat being payment for a prostitute. Genesis 38:15 says, when Judah saw her, he thought her to be a harlot because she had covered her face. And he turned unto her by the way and said, go to, I pray thee, let me come in unto thee. For he knew not that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, what wilt thou give me that thou mayest come in unto me? And he said, I will send thee a kid from the flock. And she said, wilt thou go with me a pledge till thou send it? So I almost wonder if maybe it was a mockery unto her or not. Just something interesting I thought that came across as I was studying. But everything Samson has been through has been difficult to this situation. He's facing a lot of frustration. Well, now, when he goes back, he finds out that her father has given her, his wife, to his best man. But Samson's wife was given to his companion, whom he had used as a friend. So Samson's been through all this at this point to get to the point of having this wife, and now she's gone, given to someone else. So he's angry. And we think about the things that he's done at this point, just killing 30 men, reacting the way he does. But I do want us to remember that verse when it said he sought an occasion against the Philistines. So remember, God is using him in this situation. But Samson here, in anger, again, frustration, he ties firebrands between 150 pairs of foxes and releases them throughout all their harvested crops and things. And we see that here. And when he had set the brands on fire, he let them go into the standing corn of the Philistines and burn up both the shocks and also the standing cord with the vineyards and the olives. So that means the wheat, the corn, the vineyards, the olives, a lot of their crops, doing damage to the things that were very, very important to them. So here he's reacting again, getting vengeance, always seeking those ways that he can cause trouble for them. So the Philistines, how do they react? Instead of going after Samson, they do what they threatened earlier, and they burn his wife and his father. Well, of course, he was very happy about that. No, he was not, obviously. He then turned around and slaughtered a number of Philistines in retaliation, and then he goes into hiding. Judges 15:8 says, and he smote them hip and thigh with a great slaughter, and he went down and dwelt in the top of the rock Etam. So Samson does this, and he goes off into hiding, and the Philistines, they want to go after him, so they gather a small army to get him, and the Israelites, of course, they're afraid. You know, they're scared of these Philistines coming in and what they're going to do to find Samson. So they go to Samson, they talk to him, and they ask him, will you turn yourself in? And he says basically, hey, as long as you don't kill me, I will go with you peacefully, and you can turn me in. So they do that. They tied him with new ropes, and they present him to the Philistines, and he agrees to turn himself in. Judges 15, verse 14, it picks up there, and it says, and when he came unto Lehi, the Philistines shouted against him, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and the cords that were upon his arms became as flax that was burnt with fire. And his bands loosed from off his hands, and he found a new jawbone of an ass, and put forth his hand, and took it, and slew 1,000 men therewith. And Samson said, with the jawbone of an ass, heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of an ass, have I slain 1,000 men. So we see the situation. Samson bursts the ropes by the power of God. He picks up this jawbone of the donkey, and he slaughters 1,000 Philistines. So again, situation, I think about him killing people, being around these corpses, but he is doing it in the service of God. And I don't know if that applies to his Nazarite vow or not. I saw a lot of different thoughts on that, but something interesting to think about. So he does that. After all that work, he's thirsty. He calls upon God for help. Verse 15 and 18, and he was sore thirst and called on the Lord and said, thou hast given this great deliverance into thy hand of thy servant, and now shall I die for thirst and fall to the hand of the uncircumcised? But God clave a hollow place that was in the jaw, and there came water thereout. And when he had drunk, his spirit came again, and he revived. Wherefore he called the name thereof Enachor, which is in Lehi, into this day. So here we see him calling on God, but really kind of doing it to me with a bit of an attitude. And that's one thing we've seen from Samson up to this point to me. He's very reactionary. He sees a woman he likes, he goes after her. Men make her angry, he kills them. They hurt his family, he kills more men. He doesn't have water, he gets angry at God. How are you going to leave me here to do this? And that's something I want us to think about for a moment, something I want us to consider, Because really in life, there's only about two things that I think that we can control, and that's how we react to things and how we treat others. And I hope in our daily lives that we consider God before we react to things and everything that we do, and that we treat others with Christian love. So moving forward in the story, we move forward, I guess approximately 20 years probably as we get to Samson, the end of his reign as a judge, and he's probably in his late 30s, and that's just a guess, but he's judged Israel, so he's probably been dealing with the Philistines off and on this whole time, squabbling with them in some different situations. And we find Samson now, kind of ironically, we come back to him, we find him in Gaza, which is a major city of the Philistines, where guess what he sees? A woman, and he decides that he wants to spend time there. In 16:1, then went Samson to Gaza and saw there a harlot and went in unto her. Not just any woman, but a harlot, because we know that seems to be one of his weaknesses is Philistine women and just reacting and chasing after them. And it's interesting to me because it shows that even though he served God, his service did not prevent him from making mistakes. His service did not prevent him from sinning, from giving into temptations, and sometimes just reacting to things. But the men of Gaza, they found out that Samson was there, the notorious Samson, their nemesis, the person who's done so much to them, slaughtered lots of their friends. So they know he's there, and they want to keep him there, and they want to capture him. So they lock the city gates, they post guards, and decide that they're going to take Samson in the morning. What he does, he gets up at midnight and goes up, and he literally takes the whole post, the whole gate, locked and everything, rips them up out of the ground, and carries them approximately, as far as I can tell, about 7 miles up a hill. And one interesting thing there, it doesn't mention the guards when it talks about him taking it. So I'm assuming God intervened. After all, it is God that has given him his great strength. So shortly after that, Samson again falls for another woman. Falls for a woman named Delilah. And by the description, a lot of Bible students think that she too was some type of prostitute or at least a wild woman. There's a lot of speculation that says that name Delilah might have even been a nickname for her behavior within the city. So she's definitely not a woman apparently of great repute. She's a woman probably looked down upon. But she is offered 5,500 shekels of silver to find out Samson's source of strength, because the men of the city know that they are together and they want to capture Samson. And 1 shekel of silver, and this is estimations, is equal to about 4 days' wages. So 5,500 shekels is about $700,000 in today's money. So probably a pretty good amount of money for this woman. And the Philistines realize that Samson's great strength is not normal. It's beyond a human. So they want to find that source. And he's the man that's tormented, that's killed many of their brethren. So they see this opportunity, and we stop and look at how do they get this opportunity. Because of the situation that Samson has got himself into with his weakness of following Delilah, he ends up there where he's vulnerable to these men. So she's going to try to figure out the secret to his great strength. And 3 different times she begs him, please tell me your secret. What is the secret to your strength? And Judges 16:6 says, so Delilah said to Samson, please tell me where great strength lies, and with what you may be bound to afflict you. And Samson said to her, if they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings, not yet dried, then shall I become weak and be like any other man. But he tells her this, and she wraps him up, and she tries it, and she bonds him, and it fails. And this is the thing that just confuses me. There's men lying in wait as she tells him about this, or he tells her to bind him, and he wakes up and she's bound him. Well, then she does it again, and he tells him something different. She does it again 3 different times, and every time he just continues to do it. How does he not see what is happening here? How does he fall into this path? How does he not see that she is leading him down a bad pathway? And this scares me because this happens to us. And we look at it, we say, oh, that sounds ridiculous. I would never do that. But we do things. We get caught up in situations, and we try things again and again. We get caught up in cycles, and we don't even realize how far sometimes we have moved down the wrong pathway or how we are caught up in something. He was blinded by the things that that were going on around him. He was blinded by this woman that he was involved in, the pleasures and the things that he was seeking. But for days, she continues to nag Samson about his secret, trying to find out. Verse 15, it says, and she said unto him, how canst thou say, I love thee, when thine heart is not with me? Thou hast mocked me these 3 times. I mean, listen to her language. And hast not told me wherein thy great strength lie. And it came to pass when she pressed him daily with her words, and urged him that his soul was vexed unto death. So Samson, finally, he's going to give in. He's going to tell her about the Nazirite vow that if he shaves his head, he will lose his strength. Now, the problem here is Samson is understanding the source of his strength is not really in his hair, is it? hair wasn't magical in that sense, but it was the keeping of his vow to God. God had given him that strength. Verse 17, then he told her all his heart and said unto her, there hath not come a razor upon mine head, for I have been a Nazarite unto God from my mother's womb. If I be shaven, then my strength will go from me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man. So 3 times she tried to bind Samson. Where am I at here? Oh, there we go. So the thing about the situation here, Samson gives in, and I wonder in my heart of hearts, does he actually believe his strength is going to leave him? And if he doesn't, because I don't think he does, is it because he trusts in God and the power of God? Or is it because he's become so proud? After all, he's kind of gotten himself to a lot of bad situations before, and everything's been okay. He's broken, or at least tempted, his vow to God before as a Nazarite, and everything's been okay. And we look at what happens here with Delilah, and we have to be careful. We can see ourselves. How often we get in a situation where something in our life tempts us every single day, and nags at us every single day, and pulls at us every single day until eventually we give in. Instead of thinking about God, praying to God, studying God's word, surrounding ourselves with the right people in the right places. And I think that's what Samson did here in the situation that he got himself into. And even though he looks back and thought, I've always got out of all these things, this time it seems like he went a little bit too far. Verse 19, and she made him sleep upon her knees, and she called for a man, and she caused him to shave off the 7 locks of his head. And she began to afflict him, and his strength went from him. And she said, the Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he woke out of his sleep and said, I will go out as other times before and shake myself. And he wist not that the Lord was departed from him. But the Philistines took him and put out his eyes and brought him down to Gaza and bound him with fetters of brass. And he did grind in the prison house. So something to notice here, when he wakes up and he knows that there's men that are about to come for him and he's bound, what does he do? He doesn't call upon God. He doesn't recognize that God gave him his great strength. He doesn't pray to God. He kind of goes out there and says, I can take care of this myself. And all of a sudden, God is not with him. God has left him because he didn't recognize that God was the one who gave him his power. And he got himself into the situation, and now he was not only blind to what had been going on around him, now he is literally blinded by the turn of events. So Samson is in prison, and I picture him turning one of those big grindstones that you see in the movies, grinding the corner of the wheat, and we can tell that some time has passed because it says that his hair has started to grow back out. And I wonder if the Philistines thought about that as they saw it, or if they just weren't paying attention, or they'd forgotten how they got themselves into the situation. But Samson's hair is growing out, but it doesn't say that he was strong again, which is that same idea. It wasn't the hair that gave him his strength. He hadn't turned his heart all the way back to God. He hadn't stopped and changed the way he needed to have God back with him in his life. So they're going to hold a big feast now to celebrate Dagon, their false god. And Judges 16:23, it says, then the Lord of the Philistines gathered them together for to offer a great sacrifice unto Dagon their god, and to rejoice. For they said, our God hath delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands. So it looks like a lot of the lords and the upper societies of their culture were there, and they were praising Dagon and claiming that he had brought them Samson. And when the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, our God hath delivered into our hands our enemy, and the destroyer of our country, which slew many of us. So Samson's called out. He's brought there to be entertainment for the lords. And think about the situation he's in now. He's been in prison. He's brought out now. He's obviously blind. He's weak. He's alone among his enemies, probably at the lowest point he's ever been in his life. He has hit rock bottom, and they have brought him out for sport. And it came to pass when their hearts were merry that they said, call for Samson, that he may make us sport. And they called for Samson out of the prison house, and he made them sport, and they set him between pillars. So they bring him out there, hurt, humiliated, resting him down between the pillars. And it says in the Bible that he was blind, and he reached around, and he asked a lad was there with him, a boy, and said, hey, would you help me find these pillars so I can lean upon them? So what does he do in this difficult situation at his lowest point? He finally makes the right decision, and he turns back to God. And he prays to God for his strength. In verse 28 it says, and Samson called unto the Lord and said, O Lord God, remember me, I pray thee, and strengthen me, I pray thee. Only this once, O God, that I may be at once avenged of the Philistines for my 2 eyes. And Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars upon which the house stood, and on it which was borne up, of the one with his right hand, of the other with his left. And Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. And he bowed himself with all his might, and the house fell upon the lords, and upon all the people that were therein. So the dead which he slew at his death were more than they which he slew in his life. So Samson, at this point, remembered where his great strength came from. He remembered he couldn't accomplish anything without God, and he remembered the vow that he had made in his life. And he pushed those pillars apart. The building toppled, killing thousands of people, including Samson, and it says that over 3,000 were on the roof alone, and that he killed more in his death, that he defeated more in his life. And the Bible goes on to tell us that he was then buried with his father. So we look at this story, and I'm just going to pull out a few quick things that we can learn from it, a few lessons to take, because I think there is a lot of things here. And as I said, Samson is a bit of a conundrum to me. We look at him and we see this man giving in to so many temptations and so many weaknesses, but remember that verse at the very beginning when God said, but his father and his mother knew not that it was of the Lord, that he saw it an occasion against the Philistines. So God had a plan, and that's why I just want to take a moment and look real quick at a few lessons that we can pull out of this. And number one, God can use us anyway, in anyone. He can use our weaknesses. He can use our righteousness to accomplish his will. And our own mistakes are not going to get in the way of him doing his will. It's not going to stop God from doing what he needs to be done. And we don't know what his plan is. We can see from a story like this, we definitely don't understand necessarily where that plan is going to take us. And sometimes at the lows in our life, we don't know where that's going to take us and where we're going to come out. But we need to trust in God, and we need to have faith. We need to remember where we get our strength from, and we need to have real faith, believing and obeying. Secondly, even though Samson was chosen of God, he still had to suffer the consequences of his actions. And God was using him, but he still made mistakes, and he made choices, and there were consequences for those things, and consequences for those sins that were in his life. And we see he faced a lot of difficulties. And looking at the consequences, sin can have much bigger consequences that are much more expensive and have much greater lasting effects than a lot of times we realize. Sometimes something we do in our life, a temptation we give into, it seems like something small, but it may have much greater impact in our life. And Samson started off just by chasing women. He became prideful because he wasn't really harmed by his earlier sins, but he kept going, and he got himself into deeper and deeper situations and deeper into sin. And he had a lot of warning, but he ignored those things. And he got into a situation that cost him eventually and cost him everything. And he didn't even realize when God wasn't with him because he was so wrapped up, I think, in his own pride and his own sin in the world around him. And he thought too much of his own strength, and that is something that we cannot fall into. Even when things are going good, we need to remember God. When things are going bad, we need to remember God. And sometimes that sin and its consequences hold us a lot longer than we anticipate. Think about Samson. He ended up imprisoned for a long time. We don't know how long those mistakes we make are going to stay with us. And they can cost us a lot more than we want to pay. Think about Samson, alone, hurt, weak, lost everything, his eyes and his life, due to some of the decisions that he made. Another thing that we can pull out. I finally lost the new clicker as well. There we go. We are weak without God, and we are definitely stronger with him. We can see that throughout this entire story. When he called upon God, he did amazing things. When he trusted in himself, though, he didn't. When he gave into temptation, when he gave into the things that were distracting him, things fell apart in his life. And that's the thing. We aren't strong enough on our own, and he wasn't strong enough on his own. We have to remember where our strength comes from, and that goes with this one. When we are weak, he is still strong. When we are at our lowest point, God is still there, God is still strong, and God is not changed. We just have to make sure we remember him. And that goes with my last point here. If we turn back to God with a repentant and true heart, he's going to be there. And he's going to forgive us, and he's going to take us back in, and we can get back to the life that we need to have, focused on him. And that's the thing for all of Samson's faults and the choices he made, God was using him. And in the end, he did turn back to God before he died. And God gave him strength to overcome his enemies, and he can give us strength to overcome the situations that we are in our life as well. And we know that Samson ended up in that Hall of Faith listed